Hey everyone, it's Mace1370, and today we're going to be talking about my RTA tier list for October 2020. Before we get into that though, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. The Discord that I mentioned a couple videos ago is still growing and going strong. I'll put the link for that below, so please make sure to come check it out so that we can talk about Epic 7, video games, and just other real-world topics. A big thank you to Warbald for featuring me in his most recent community post. I really appreciate it. It's awesome to, grow the community and be able to share my videos with as many people as possible. So I really appreciate that plug. And then lastly, before we get into the tier list, I'm going to do another Leaf Pack giveaway, so please make sure to comment below on this video with your in-game username and Discord handle. And then in the next video, I will be picking a winner for the Leaf Pack. So make sure to check back to see if you won. Okay. So for this RTA tier list, I decided to break the heroes down into, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different categories. D, C, B, A, S, and double S. The D category is the bottom one, double S is the top one. The D category are heroes that are essentially never used in RTA, or if they are used, I believe put you at a significant disadvantage. And there could be a variety of reasons for why that's the case for these heroes. There are so many of them that I'm not going to go into every single one in great detail. In general, 3 stars are going to go into this category just because their base stats are so much lower than the 4 and 5-star heroes that, gear is such a significant, part of what makes a hero powerful. 3 stars are at a really big disadvantage. I'm not saying they can't be used, I'm just saying if you do use them, they're just going to perform at a level where if you were using a 5-star hero with a similar kit or similar abilities, you would just be doing better because of the stat difference. So it's very hard / impossible for a 3-star unit to really shine in high-level RTA because of the stat difference. But there are some 4 and 5-star heroes in this list, and they oftentimes just don't have a kit that makes them relevant. They either don't do enough, or somebody else does everything they do plus other things, so it's just generally not a viable unit for RTA. That said, pretty much any unit can technically be used. I'm just saying these are not really used at the high level. Champion and above, essentially. So that's the D tier. C tier, these are very niche units that are either very useful in their role, but that role is extremely narrow and not commonly encountered, or they are someone who is okay, but somebody does their job better. So that's a C tier unit. A B tier unit is kind of what I would consider to be a standard niche unit. It's a unit that is very good in its specific, situation, but that situation doesn't happen very much, but when it does, that unit is, the best one that you could have for that role. However, given the, just the way people draft, you're just not going to be picking that unit very often. A tier is the next up, and those are units that are very strong in their role. They offer a lot in their kit. They're just very well-rounded units, and they really kind of are commonly selected in whether it be like a cleave comp or bruiser comp or control comp, whatever. S tier, these are the extremely strong units in their role. They're the ones that kind of shine above others. Like they're the best tank or the best CR pusher, something like that. They're really up at the top. And then double S units, they're not very many, but these units are like meta warping. They're so strong, or they're so advantaged in a certain area that they shift the entire meta around them. Alright, so like I said, I'm not going to talk too in depth about these D units. I will mention that, all the 3 stars that just came out, I think they're pretty much down here. This guy, you can build him with Extinction. Glenn, I think his name is. He has Extinction, so you could build him fast, like one-shot or an RB. Not saying it wouldn't work, just that there's units that do it better, with more stats. So let's see, who else do we have in this D tier that might be worth mentioning in particular. Obviously, like the units that have a specialty change are just worse than their specialty change counterparts, like, Clury. Tamarin is not really used very often in RTA. When she's typically comboed with Iseria, and that combo is just too easily disrupted since you can ban one. You don't have to deal with the other one. They really need to be a pair to work. It's also harder as you get higher up in speed to tune them correctly, because the 5% variance at the start of the match can really kind of screw with their speed tuning and make it hard for them to go one right after the other without either somebody cutting in between or them screwing up their order. So there's not a lot to say for these D tier units. If you have a question about one in particular, then we can talk about it. There's too many to speak about individually, like I said. I will mention that Elfelt really needs a change. She's just not in a good spot right now. Her damage is just so low. It's hard for her to be impactful. Same deal with Kalric. He is just not doing enough damage for him to be relevant at the higher levels. Alright, so we can kind of set that aside and move on from the D tier to the C tier. Alright, so as you can see, there are a lot of units here in the D tier. We're going to move on up to C. Alright, so here are C tier units. Blue Dominial is a stunner, and I have seen her used occasionally, paired with characters like Spez to enable his extra damage. But she just doesn't do enough damage or offer enough, in her kit to really move her up beyond this. Blue Kisei is a damage dealer, and the problem with Blue Kisei, I think, is that there's a lot of really good damage dealers, and so it's hard for a damage dealer to shine unless they're truly spectacular right now. She does offer stealth to protect herself, and she has a good interaction with barriers, to do more damage. But I think that there are heroes that fill that slot better, like Spectre Tenebria. So it'll be interesting to see if her buffs, cause her to move up, in the future. But for now, I think she's still down in C tier. You just don't see her used very often. Destina is a strong dispeller. She can be good against debuff teams. You could make an argument for bumping her up to B tier. I think Angelic Montmorency is more commonly used than Destina is. I think Momo has so much ER baked into her kit that it's just easier to build her against, debuff comps. Blue Roman is next. He's also not commonly picked, but I have seen him used occasionally. He can be used as a stripper, so built fast, and he can also CR pushback. But there's a lot of other heroes that do this and do it better than he does. I mean, his ML counterpart now is pretty much just strictly better than he is, since it doesn't have the elemental disadvantage. Tywin is a hero who has an interesting kit and does his job well. He's just kind of fallen off, I think kind of for the same reason that Tamasaria has. It's hard to get two units, speed tuned in a way that make him really work, and more importantly, the combo, that he's run with, Basar, is now hard countered by Holiday Euphine, and so it's harder to, bring him into that type of team composition in RTA. But Tywin is very strong, he def breaks a lot of people, he CR pushes, so he does have a role, and every so often you will see him used, but it's just not common. Yuna does offer some interesting possibilities, with her speed buff and attack buff. She can also be built crazy fast and like high damage on drink. She's kind of fallen off too. I think she's just a little squishy. She doesn't really protect herself. So it just seems like there's better options, I think, for accomplishing the same goal. Redicades, another good healer that can be used in certain situations. If you build her with high effect resistance, then she can help combo or prevent your team from being overwhelmed by debuffs, and she has very high healing throughput. The problem with Redicades is that she doesn't have the effect resistance like Momo does, so I feel like Momo just does her job better in RTA. Adley here, I put up in C tier even though he is a 3-star, because he can CR push himself, and so you can kind of use him as a strange tech against cleave teams. I have seen that used on occasion, but it's a very, very small niche, or a very narrow niche, I should say. But he is used on occasions in high levels, so that for me puts him above D tier, even though he's a 3-star. Green Armin offers a ton of protection for your team, and her EE that lets her stun means that she can actually be slotted into some control comps, protecting them, as well as offering a little bit of CC herself. So I think she is a viable pick, but it's a very narrow niche that she can fit into. BBK is a cleaver. She does a lot of damage, but we're in a situation where there are heroes that just do more damage than she does and better. Arbiter Vildred is so oppressive, can be built so fast, and can do so much damage, and he revives. BBK is just eclipsed by other heroes that do her role better right now. Charles is kind of the fall from grace in RTA. Here's a hero that was just absolutely oppressive everywhere, and he just kind of fell away. And honestly, I think that there's other heroes, other bruisers, that are just more of a threat, or more of a threat than Charles is. And then also, he's very RNG, so sometimes he doesn't pop off and he just doesn't do anything. And these days, even when he does pop off, it just doesn't seem like he's doing enough damage or enough pressure to the enemy team to really justify him. I have seen him drafted, and he can work in the right scenarios, I think, still. But I think there's other bruisers that just seem to be shining over him. The scenarios where I've seen him used, in the current meta, if he's built super fast as kind of a intro to a cleave team, he does damage himself and then he offers attack buff to the team. So he can be used as kind of a sneaky cleave because they'll pick him early and you think, oh, they're doing a bruiser team, and then nope, they're cleaving you. So I've seen him used to some success in that setting. And then also against T-Cern, I've seen him used because he can, hit her twice. So he's one of those units that can be kind of like soft counter T-Cern. Green Sid has a speed imprint, so he'll always have some level of viability for that reason. He can also do decent damage, but there's just other heroes like Remnant Violet that do the speedy damage dealer thing better than he does right now. Crimson Armin, also a decent hero. She has several uses that she can be pulled in. She's a knight that offers immunity, which is always a good thing. Against certain team compositions, immunity is very strong. She also has a ton of protection baked into her kit. Her passive is basically Adamant Shield, and you can give her Aureus, and that's a lot of protection in one unit. So if you build her fast, she can help, counteract, I guess, some cleave teams. Also, her imprint is effect resistance, so she can be used against debuff compositions in that way as well. If you pair her with some like a cleanser like Angelic Montmorency, she's going to buff up Momo's effect resistance even more. So it's kind of a tech thing you can do with Crimson Armin. Fighter Maya can be built as a bruiser and can do a decent job in that role. Because she cleanses herself when she's hit, she can actually be drafted against control compositions as well. I think that she can be fine in this role. She can be decent. It just seems like there's other heroes that do her job better. For example, like Champion Zerato, I feel like he's just a better against debuff comps than Fighter Maya is, but she can definitely work. Guider Aether, not somebody I see every day, but I have seen some really high damage builds, with him, so I suppose he's technically viable. And definitely above D tier, I guess. Gunther, a very niche role. I guess you could... I think C tier is fine for Gunther. His niche role is essentially either kind of a mean combo with Lilius, because he can have such high attack, or if you put Uberius Tooth on him, he can just one-shot a Rylet through a miss. So I've heard of some people doing that. I've never run into it myself. Gerardo has, I think, a silence and some CR manipulation stuff, so he can be used in some specific scenarios, but it's not very common. Judge Kisei, extremely powerful cleaver. Kind of like BBK, she can be drafted in cleave teams, but you don't see her used very often. Typically paired with Alots, more of an arena offense thing than an RTA thing, but I do see her on occasion. And she can also be built very fast with effectiveness. Also an option. I think that doing that, she lacks a little bit in her kit otherwise, but I have seen that used. Judith has a speed imprint, so and a good base speed, so she's just viable for that reason, essentially. Not much more needs to be said with her, but it's a pretty small niche where, you're going to use Judith. Kayron, kind of another fall from grace. He was a very strong damage dealer, I feel like, in last season, and there's just been enough stuff, I guess, that's come out that kind of invalidates him. He doesn't seem as powerful as he used to be, but he still has some scenarios where he's very useful. Against cleave teams, he can be good because his immortality lets you get a turn with him if they don't strip the immunity, and stun him or something like that. So he can be decent against cleave teams. He can kind of be a soft pick against RB because the immortality prevents Kayron from dying, and then he can one-shot the RB, and then he extends his immortality. ML Ken, another one who's really fallen down. I think ML Ken is rarely viable. I suppose if you take him against RB, it could work. It's going to be a very specific scenario, though, where ML Ken is going to work, because it gets ignored really easily these days. I would love to get a nice Efrez build on him so that RB can't blind him. I think that would help a lot with him, but it's very hard to pull that off without crazy gear. Maid Chloe, somebody who's also really fallen off this season, I think essentially because of ML Haste, just totally invalidates her. Also, even without ML Haste, you can still strip off her buffs and stuff. She just doesn't seem very useful. I'm not sure what they can do for Maid to make her better. It's kind of a shame, because she was a very fun unit to see in aggressive compositions, and she's just not really there anymore. Fire Ravi, I put down at C tier because I'm still not 100% convinced she's an amazing all-around bruiser. I think she's a bruiser that can work in certain scenarios, kind of like as, an Alencia counter if they have other grass units on the team. But I don't think she has the versatility to be kind of an early pick like you would see in the B and the A units, or the B, A, and S units, I guess. So I might move her up later. We'll see. We'll have to see. Now that she's been buffed, maybe she's a little more viable. Red Surin, speed imprint. That's pretty much the only reason why she's here. If you have a speed imprint, the lowest you could be in is C tier, in my opinion. There's going to be some potential way to use a speed imprint unit, even at the highest levels of RTA. Green Vildred, another speed imprint, so he's automatically at C tier, and he can kind of be used in some cleave teams. Green Euphine. Some people have tried using her really fast as a stripper and a silencer, so it can work. I feel like there might be better options, but it's technically viable. Baiken also can be used as a CR pusher. Not commonly done, but technically viable. Sage Ball and Cezanne can fit into some CC teams. We haven't really seen him break into the meta yet, though, so I consider him still used in very rare niche scenarios. ML Ren, you could make an argument for bumping her up to B tier because she has a super high base speed and she can give your team immunity. Maybe it was a mistake to put her in C tier. I just don't see her very commonly. Maybe a lot of people don't have her built up. I feel like she's not quite as useful as the other immunity buffers, though, so for now I'll leave her in C tier. Crozet, Troublemaker Crozet, he can really protect a squishy unit. He's a decent knight. I feel like there's just other knights that do his job better, so that's why I have him down here. They do the damage mitigation thing better than he does at the moment. The stun on his S1 is nice, if it lands. Melissa was kind of hyped up as a Rylot counter. The problem with her, though, is that she needs to beat Rylot in speed, and at best I feel like that's a coin flip these days because Rylots are built so quickly, and she doesn't have Rylot's evasion at the start of the battle, so she just dies. So that's why Melissa's down here. Maybe they will give her some sort of self-protection and she'll get bumped up, but for now there are units that just does what she does better, I think. General Purgus, generally not drafted in RTA, will occasionally be taken as a counter to Faithless Litica because he CR pushes the team. That's where I've seen him used. Specimen Says, also extremely rarely used. You could honestly maybe put him down in D tier, but he could technically, I guess, be built as a bruiser, and he does really crazy damage if they're stunned, so I feel like he does have a niche role. Dollmaker, Pearl Horizon, I haven't seen used yet, really, but I assume she can fit in some debuff comps, so I put her here in C. Celine just doesn't seem to be that reliable to go any higher. She can kind of counter A-lots, but because it's a 1 out of 4 to hit the target that you want, I feel like it's just not that reliable. She can sometimes get a ban, though, from the opponent. Biceria, I don't know, maybe I'll catch some flack for this. I know some people use her, but I think the problem with Biceria is it's kind of like Melissa. If you want her to do anything, she has to be built fast. And then she also has kind of this damage kit where her debuffs only have 85% chance to land. And she's not doing a ton of damage either at that speed. She's doing some. It's maybe enough to, get squishy targets down, but it's close. And then just the chance that her debuffs don't land is so crippling. And then, so let's say all that happens. She's still a very squishy target at that point, and she doesn't have any way to protect herself. And you have to give her Oath Key, or Rylot has, a fairly decent chance to dodge her. So even after she does her S3, if the debuffs didn't land, the rest of her kit just doesn't do that much. She death breaks, I guess, but I don't know. Her kit doesn't seem to synergize that well for me. I feel like she needs a little bit of a tweak. She can be viable. She's honestly a better Kayron counter than a Rylot counter, and Kayron's fallen off the meta, so maybe if Kayron was more prevalent, Viseria would get more play. She just feels like a counter against Rylot that is not very reliable. Like Falconer Clury is a more reliable counter, and she's a specialty change hero. Feels bad for an ML5. Urfalin just came out. He's a hero that I think is fine. He does his job as a damage dealer, but he's just kind of a worse version of Rylot. And time will tell. I'm subject to change on these just based on experience. Sometimes it takes a few weeks to a month or two to really figure out how a unit is performing. And Ervelyn, I think, is right now in a spot where I can't think of a reason why I would ever want him over Rylot. Rylot starts the battle with evasion, and therefore protects himself. Ervelyn does not. Rylot has better base stats than Ervelyn does, and Ervelyn's protection can be easily stripped off of him. Rylot's cannot because it has evasion. It gives him evasion, so he can, the strip can be missed, and then he keeps the evasion debuff. Ervelyn doesn't have that, so Ervelyn can just get stripped. So that's kind of my thoughts on Ervelyn. Ray can be fine as a cleanser. He can definitely work, but I feel like DJ Basar kind of does what he does, just better. And they have the same stat line, so that's kind of why I have him down here in C. I think otherwise he would be in B tier if DJ Basar didn't exist. So those are the C tier units. We can go ahead and move on up to the B tier. Okay, so these are the B tier units, and they're still in some sense a niche unit, but I think that either their niche is a little more broad, like you run into that scenario where they're good more often than the heroes in C tier, or they are they're stronger in that niche than the C tier heroes are. So Sigrid, blue Sigrid's up, and she's a damage dealer that can fill a variety of jobs that few other damage dealers can. The fact that she can trigger again off of her skill 2 means that she can kill Tempest Surin, which is really strong. She has Extinction on her skill 3, so she can take care of Arby. So in this way, Sigrid, I think, can fit very well into cleave compositions or very aggressive compositions and answer some threats that would normally give those compositions difficulties. That said, she doesn't really protect herself and she's squishy, so if she's not in that type of cleave comp, she doesn't work that well. So that's why she's down in B tier. You could make an argument, I guess, that she is A tier material because she fills that role so well. So I could see putting her up into A tier. With ML Lulu coming out soon, I feel like Lulu might fill this role also because of the extinction thing, so we'll have to see how that changes. But I could see an argument for putting Sigrid up into A. Assassin Sid, he's really good at being fast, so he can counter speed cleaves for that reason. He's one of the better heroes in that role, but beyond that he doesn't do that much, so that's why he's down here in B. Assassin Coley, also another speedy damage dealer, more of a tank buster, but she does that role decently well. I think she's down in B because there's other heroes that kind of do the same thing she does, namely Spectre Tenebria, and just do it better. A Coley is a little awkward because she can get bumped out of stealth, and then she just dies. Spectre Tenebria can't get bumped out. So usually when you're drafting A Coley, you have to kind of take her with a skill nullifier hero, like FCC or something like that. But she, can work for sure, and she can fill that role well. Angelic Montmorency, an extremely powerful debuffer, one of the best heroes, healers I should say, that you can pick against debuff compositions. She has a bunch of effect resistance baked into her kit, and she can be, a real pain for debuff teams to deal with. Rowana, a strong SSB counter, not infallible, because SSB can debuff her with, heal block and buff block, as well as, your allies. And if that happens, you can be in a pretty bad spot. Most people put her on Stella Harpa because it helps cleanse whenever she gets hit and can remove those debuffs, as well as the def breaks from SSB. But Rowana, despite that slight weakness, is still a strong SSB counter when used in the right team composition. And I pick her very frequently against SSB, and it usually works when I do that. Elena, another hero that is extremely strong in her niche. I pick her against cleave teams if you run her really fast. It is very difficult for the enemy team to cleave you because you put her on Magraha's Tome, the enemy uses an AoE ability like Faithless Lydica's AoE ability, and then Elena pushes herself up, and that 30% boost really puts her out of reach of even heroes like Sidon. And then she gives your entire team invincible, and the other team just loses because they're squishy. So that's kind of Elena's role. You could theoretically use her against debuff teams if you built her with high effect resistance. I think that would be a viable option. You can Soulburner S1 and just totally cleanse your team, which is nice. I've also kind of toyed with the idea of using her to counter ML Crow. Whenever he AoEs, with his horse, she would heal, and that could mitigate the impact of ML Crow. Haven't tested it yet, but it's crossed my mind as an option. Fire Litica, high base speed, so she can be used to speed contest. She's very good in that role. She's also slotted often into debuff team, or kind of control team compositions. Cerise, also extremely high base speed, and a very good counter to Alots and Faithless Litica. I think the problem with Cerise is that she takes all of your good speed gear, if you want her in that role. Fire Litica, kind of the same problem, but at least Fire Litica can be slotted into control compositions. I guess Cerise can too. I don't really play those teams, so for me she's just a Lots or Faithless Litica counter, but she does a good job at that. Watcher Shuri has a speed imprint. He's also an extremely powerful nuker, so he works well in cleave compositions or aggressive, CR pushing compositions, so he can one-shot really tanky healers like Ruel. He's very good at that job. Nobody can one-shot like Watcher Shuri for the most part because he has 100% Def Pen and can crit on his S3. It can do a ton of damage. Fire Charlotte, she's kind of made a little bit of a resurgence. She's a fairly strong fire bruiser right now. She fills that, that role pretty well. Having AoE is nice because then she can reach heroes like Spectre Tenebria. So I think Fire Charlotte is in a good spot. Vivian, an immunity buffer, also in a good spot right now. We'll have to see with ML Luluka coming out how much Vivian still gets used. Everyone's going to move their Dingus Orb maybe over to ML Lulu, but immunity for your whole team is really nice and very strong. And then Vivian can do heavy AoE damage, so she fills a good role. ML Araminta, also a very strong hero. I think she's the only hero with a 100% AoE stun. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in the right comps, if you can strip away the team and get a turn with her, she just controls the game. DJ Basar, I think, is a tricky hero to use because he's so squishy, and he doesn't have I don't think any or not much innate effect resistance in his Awakening, so it's a little harder to build him as ER heavy as it is Angelic Montmorency. But if you can get him to 250 effect resistance with decent hit points and defense, and around 200 plus speed, he can really counter CC compositions because he cleanses your whole team, CR pushes them, and gives everybody immunity. So in that role, he is very good. Champion Zerato, people are really down on him ever since the, air quotes, change, more of a nerf, I guess, where now he needs effectiveness to transfer debuffs, but I still think he is excellent in his role at countering debuff teams. I plan on plus 15 in mine eventually. He would be plus 15 at this point, but I pulled him so late. He was one of the last ML4s I ever got. So for now, I just have his counter molded, but eventually I'll be molding the damage too. I think he is extremely strong against debuff teams still, despite the change. Because those teams that you're slotting him into, you're not slotting him in to debuff high ER units typically. It's usually a bunch of debuffers that don't have effect resistance. They have effectiveness, so I don't think the change made that much of a difference. Mursa, an evasion unit. Mursa, I think, can be a reasonable pick against cleave teams because of her evasion. So that's why I put her up here in B tier, one of the few 3 stars to make it this high. I've seen a bunch of people use Mursa against cleave comps, and I think she can work. Dark Corvus, extremely strong tank buster against the right teams. He's basically a must ban or he'll win. Against the slow tanky teams that don't have a way to control him or to nuke him down before he can activate. Iseria here I think has probably moved up a bit in my estimation, with tank teams becoming more prevalent. Her ability to defense break and unbuffable and strip all on one unit is really strong, and then her S2 is extremely unique and can combo really well with a ton of different units, resetting Ruels, resetting just anything with a really powerful S3. People are building her as a bruiser now with Proof of Valor, and I think that it's a very strong option. ML Haste came out as a big RB counter and ironically nerfed Maiden to the ground, but he does an excellent job at countering RB. If they take RB and you take ML Haste, he is almost always a must ban for them. I'd say in 99% of circumstances. Sometimes they can just overwhelm you with damage and wipe your team before ML Haste can take his turn, so essentially before you can kill the RB. And in those scenarios, he doesn't do much, but if you draft correctly around him, he becomes a must-ban. He's also kind of slotted into this new true damage composition team with ML Crow, ML Haste, and then comboed with I have like Fallen CC and RB and Rylet and stuff like that. And the fact that his S3 does a significant amount of true damage can be really powerful when comboed with those to kind of finish off a thicker target. Holiday Euphine got a lot of hate when she came out with her kit. People didn't seem to think that she was good. I think she is good. I think that in the right scenarios, she's extremely strong. She's the best Basar counter in the game, and Basar is cancer still, even with her in the game. If you don't have Holiday Euphine built up and they take Basar, he is, in many scenarios, a must-ban. Holiday Euphine also has other roles, and it depends on how you build her. If you build her as a bruiser, with high attack like I do, her burns can do decent damage, and so you can take her against control comps. Her cleanse can help. She can help counter, CR pushbacks from not only Basar, but enemies like Broman. So she has use in that way. And those teams are typically not very tanky, so even though she's not the highest damage unit, she can still kill them. So I think she works there. I've seen some players use her as a CR pusher, building her really fast at high levels. I think that's viable also. So I think Holiday Euphine has, a role. It's a niche role, but she does well in that role. All right, so that's it for the B units. We can go ahead and move up to the A units here. Okay, here are the A units. These are units that are very strong in their role. They offer a lot in their kit. They're picked typically more frequently than the units in the B tier. And I think that they're oftentimes kind of, either defining or really common components to certain team compositions, whether that be like tanks or / bruisers or control, cleave, etc. So Diane is a very strong healer / buffer support unit. She can cycle really fast, she generates souls really quickly. Her buffs are all super strong, attack buff and anti-crit. Diane can be a huge threat to the enemy team and really motivate them to take a stripper to deal with her. Alencia, an extremely strong bruiser, has I think actually fallen down a little bit. I think a month or two ago I would have put her up into S tier, but now I don't know what's changed so much. I think the meta's maybe sped up a bit, so I'm finding that I want to build Alencia faster than I have her, and she can also be controlled fairly easily. FCC can just provoke lock her, there's other heroes that can lock her down, and when she's built a little slower, a single stun or a single CC can just take her out of the game for so long. That said though, she's still an extremely strong bruiser and can do a ton of damage. She can strip, she brings defense buffs, so her kit is absolutely loaded. She has defense break as well. So still extremely strong. I think I need to speed mine up, and in general, maybe if the meta just slows down a tad, she'll come back again. But I think for now, in the current meta, it's shifted her down just a hair. Tempest Surin, also a very strong damage dealer. Has a very unique ability in terms of the number of hits and her interactions with like Aureus and shields. So she fills that role very well. With greater attack, she can, from a basket proc, she can do a ton of damage. And she's element neutral, so an AoE element neutral unit like that is kind of a pain to kill can be very strong. Crow, some people are down on Crow. I think he's still excellent. And the scenarios where he's useful against, obviously he's an Aureus holder, but I think he has some use against ML Crow, because ML Crow does so much true damage to your whole team. It's going to let Crow horse very quickly. Horse, his S3 ability, does enough damage to still be very relevant. Units like Rylet that are a plague right now, Crow can just one-shot with his horse. So I think Crow still has uses. He's not, I think, maybe as high as he used to be a month ago, but he's still a very good tank. Likewise, Fire CC, also a very good tank. Immunity is such a strong buff. The fact that she can do that, I think, is very worth building, and she will perform well for you as an immunity buffer. You could put her on Crown of Glory and use her as kind of a soft counter to ML Tywin because she gives immunity and then helps prevent him from soul burning. Also, her attack break and provoke can help lock down difficult to access, enemy units like Spectre Tenebria. So CC has a lot of utility in her kit, and I think is a very good tank. Lilius, kind of the same story. I see Lilius built more often as a bruiser than a pure tank. I think she excels in that bruiser role. You build her with crit damage and some speed and pair her with, a high attack unit and she'll cleave. She does damage. Her cleanse is also very strong against units like Falcon or Clury, or just, any other debuffer for that matter. The provoke can be soul burned and lock down really high value targets like Ruel. Even just locking down Rylet with Lilius provoke is strong and prevents him from hitting other units. So I think Lilius is a very strong bruiser right now. Fire Tenebria, extremely strong debuffer, super annoying to play against. She's kind of, the epitome of a debuffer in that she push back, she offers slow, she can sleep, take other units out of the game, and she can defense break, makes her very scary. Little Queen Charlotte, also a very good bruiser. Her passive, basically granting Adamant Shield, I think is really strong. If you build her on Sigurd's Scythe, she can be very annoying. It can heal back up. Also, a good unit to take out Dark Heroes with. So I think she's a solid all-around bruiser. Her problem is that she's single target, which can kind of open you up to getting Spectre Tenebriad. So you have to be careful taking her. And then also, it's hard to build her tanky enough to not die quickly now that Rylet's around. I've noticed it's kind of hard to take her against Rylet because he can come out the gate and hit her and take her down to like 20 or 30% health, and really risks, just losing her out the gate. Ravi, also a very strong bruiser, suffers the same problem of being single target only, and in a world with Spectre Tenebrias and Assassin Coalies, that can be dangerous. But Ravi offers a lot of power in her kit, with her self-healing and her res with Skill Null. So I think a very strong bruiser in the right scenarios. She really fills that bruiser role very, very well. Cdom, quintessential for cleave teams, an extremely strong nuker. I put her above Watcher Shuri because I see her drafted with Faithless Lidica. The synergy there between Faithless Lidica and Cdom is so strong. That synergy doesn't really exist for Watcher Shuri as much. She CR pushes the team, huge nukes. Crit buff, so you can build her, with 50% crit and load everything into attack and crit damage. So she's extremely good. Blue Rose has made a bit of a resurgence as a CR pusher in upper levels. There are maybe a smaller subset of people that use her this way, but she can still be very annoying and difficult to deal with, and just overwhelm you with damage from the people that she boosts. Adventurer Ras I kind of put on the same tier as Fire CC and Crow, just an excellent tank with a ton of utility built in. Defense buff is amazing. You can soul burn his S2 repeatedly and really add a lot of damage, in defense breaks to your team. So a very strong tank. Shu, good bruiser. Anti-crit is a good buff to bring. She puts invincible on herself as well. And she can really hit hard on her S2, which is, very powerful. So I think Shu is a good bruiser right now. Maybe just a hair below Valencia because she doesn't have the strip. But still very strong. Let's see, Mui. Also a very good debuffer. You could argue maybe she's a B unit. I guess I see her picked a little less than Spectre Tenebria, but, she brings stuns, I think attack buff. So she's a very strong component of, control teams right now, and she does a very good job in that role. All right, so that's all of the A units. Let's take a look at our S units. Okay, so our S tier heroes, these are heroes that are, extremely strong in their role, and they're powerful enough that they typically require you to either ban them or to counter them. It's going to force you to draft around them. They're that strong. So first up is Clury. She's extremely impressive right now. Her ability to be built, very quickly, on top of still tanky and some effectiveness, allows her to immediately put the opponent at a disadvantage at the start of the match by taking one of their units completely out of the fight, via provoke and defense break. Often paired with Remnant Violet, he just follows up and deletes the unit that she defense breaks. But even if he isn't able to kill, there's still a 2-turn provoke to deal with, and it really prevents a lot of units from being able to respond. Falconer Cleary is a hero I've seen a lot of people pre-ban. She's so powerful. And if they don't pre-ban her, they either take them themselves or they likely end up banning her on the enemy team. Fallen Cecilia, an extremely strong tank. I think probably the best tank in the game right now. The fact that she gives everyone a shield at the start of the battle means that she really helps combat very offensive team compositions like Cleave by giving you a lot more survivability. She follows up with Skill Null on her first turn to give everyone, a whole extra turn of getting hit with no consequences. Her S1 has 100% provoke, so she can lock down units like Alencia we talked about, or other, slower heroes that don't have a ton of effect resistance. So she can be very helpful in that regard. And her damage scaling is not horrendous either, with really high health. If you build her with a bit of crit, she can really pack a punch. If you don't build crit, you can usually fit in some effectiveness and help, provoke key units at the right time. So Fallen Cecilia, extremely strong. Alots, he is, the core of many Cleave teams as a CR pusher. Built extremely fast. He cycles quick and, bumps somebody up at the start of the match. Without him, cleaving really wouldn't be possible. It would be very difficult. And if he's on the enemy team, you oftentimes have to ban him or the target that he's going to push. The fact that he's a mage, he can hold Book for a follow-up soul burn. So he is, a frequent ban on the enemy side when they're cleaving. Ruel, one of the stronger healers in the game. Her res can be extremely annoying to deal with. In many situations, you are forced to kill her before you can do anything to the other enemy units, because she can just bring it back if you kill them. Very strong in bruiser teams. If she's paired with a Tywin, it's even more toxic because if you do finally manage to kill the Tywin, she reses him. So she's very strong right now, and I think will continue to be that way. The fact that her res gives them invincibility means that she doesn't even need to wait for them to die necessarily. It also full cleanses. Her S2 full cleanses. And to top it all off, you can soul burn her S1 and effectively top up your entire team in a tight situation. So a very powerful healer. Doesn't hurt that she has, I think, like the highest base defense in the game, so she can be built extremely thick. Broman. Broman has in many ways taken the place of Basar as the unit to build fast to strip the enemy team and disrupt them. He's element neutral, which is really strong. He doesn't give unbuffable, but he does, have a chance to silence the enemy team. And if he lands those silences on the right units, that can be game in and of itself. He is very difficult to deal with. Holiday Euphine can help against him, but he's not hard countered by Holiday Euphine like Basar is. So Broman is very scary on the enemy side and oftentimes necessitates a ban. Faithless Lidica is another core unit that fits into Cleave teams. Extremely oppressive in her ability to reset a unit like Ruel, a slower unit that you're going to really rely on to answer them with like a powerful S3. If you're running Crow, for example, she can reset the Crow and prevent him from horsing if you're using him against a Cleave comp. She gives Skill Null to the enemy or to her team, and that's really the icing on the cake for her that really pushes her over the edge. Oftentimes when you're fighting against a Cleave team, you just needed one more turn to win, or just a little bit more damage, and her putting Skill Null on everything just delays you being able to deal with them for a turn, which a turn for you is oftentimes 1.5 turns for them because they're all so fast. So Faithless Lidica, extremely strong component to Cleave teams, and can also fit into control teams as well because of the skill reset. So a very powerful unit. Seaside Bellona, still up in S tier despite counter units like Rowana. Seaside Bellona is a unit that if they take and you don't have one of her now, several counters, like Rowana or Dark Corvus or ML Crow. She is oftentimes a must ban herself. She can solo entire teams without even taking a turn. She is just such a versatile unit. It's pretty ridiculous. I doubt they're ever going to make another unit like her because she was so oppressive when she came out. And even now, after Rowana, she is still extremely strong. So it just goes to show you how nuts she really was. Her debuffs on her skill 3 can shut Rowana down. Her defense breaks. She's great against enemy bruiser teams because she'll just slowly whittle them down. She's great against cleave teams as well because her damage transfer helps her stay alive. And the fact that she doesn't need to take a turn to do damage to them is super powerful. They oftentimes, cleave teams will bring a lot of AoE damage to her, or to you, and if you pick Seaside Bellona, she's a way to do damage back to them and circumvent the fact that they're also fast. So Seaside Bellona, extremely powerful, and I think well deserving of S tier. She would be double S if it wasn't for Rowana and the other units that kind of soft counter her, like ML Crow and Dark Corvus. So Basar is up next. Still an S tier despite Holiday Euphine. Basar is a unit that when the enemy takes him, if you don't ban him or have an answer, he can just hit by himself. He can just destroy you. He's usually paired with Abyssal Crown because he can strip. And if the Crown stuns at the right moment, you're just dead. And the fact that Crown can stun on miss is just totally ridiculous, and just makes him that much more powerful. Dizzy, also kind of in a similar role as a controller to Basar. She brings so many debuffs. She can cycle fast, she can push you back, and then her S1 stuns, and then all 3 of her abilities are AoE. And so you can put Ayala Violin on her and just constantly strip off buffs. So I've run Dizzy and I've run into Dizzy, where there are either immunity buffers on my side or the enemy side, and sometimes it doesn't seem to matter. If she procs counterattacks if you have her on counter set, or if she's really fast, it's like you never even buffed with immunity. They're gone that quickly, with the right procs from Ayala Violin. Alternatively, if you're running her in a more dedicated control team and you put Crown on her, that's also super toxic. The stun chance on her S1 plus Crown, she can just completely lock down a team by herself. So Dizzy is an extremely oppressive unit, and I think the only reason why she's not double S is because she's not really warping the meta so much right now. There are other debuffers that are also kind of, pushing people to build anti-CC units, and she doesn't really do anything differently in that regard than those units do. So that's Dizzy. Spectre Tenebria, also a unit who has kind of bounced around tier lists for me and other people over time. She is kind of a meta-dependent unit in that if there's a lot of AoE going on, it's hard to fit her in. The reason I put her up in S tier and not A tier is because when she is drafted, she is a huge threat, and she can completely dismantle teams all by herself. In addition to that, she also can be more flexibly taken in a cleave type composition because she can hold book, and soul burn and do a lot of damage all by herself. So she can be a little more versatile in that you don't need to only take her when they don't have AoE. She can fit in cleave comps as well. I could see an argument for moving her down to A tier. It seems like right now, though, if they don't take any AoE damage dealers, they just lose to S-Tenny. So a very strong unit in that way. But again, like I said, I could see her going down into A. So that's for the most part all of our regular units. We'll go ahead and look at the double S ones right now. Okay, so these double S units are so influential that they are warping the meta around them. For whatever reason, people's entire drafting strategy seems to revolve around or in response to these units. I think I'll talk about Arbiter Vildred and Remnant Violet at the same time because they both share the same base stat line, and I think that's a huge component of what makes these units so problematic. These thieves have, I think, the best stat line in the game. Their base stats are extremely high, and that allows them to be built with more damage at a faster speed than other units in the game. And that's why you can make Remnant Violet at 250 speed and still one-shot things. You just can't do that with some of the other damage dealers. They don't have the same, level of stats. Same thing with Arby. You can build him at 230, and with a greater basket proc, he can wipe your entire team. In some ways, it's a necessity to have, damage that strong when you have really strong tanks, but that high stat line is very difficult to balance around. And I've noticed that both of these guys right now have really pushed the meta towards a speed meta, like Falcon or Clury, either comboing with like Rose or Falcon or Clury and just, fast units overall and getting that first turn. There's drafts I've had where I take Fallen Cecilia and then I'm not really sure what to take, and I'll take Falcon or Clury and Rylet, and then I'll just take Arby and something else, and they'll ban this something else or they'll ban, whatever. And Arby will literally just destroy their team with a couple basket procs all by himself. They're that strong. I think that ML Tywin is another unit kind of in a league of his own as well. His recent overbuffing in response to his original, release has pretty much earned him the permanent spot of pre-ban for me this season. I hardly ever ban anyone other than ML Tywin. I will occasionally ban different units if I know a particular player, like either I know they don't have ML Tywin, or I know that they have another unit that's a really core member of their kit that's more important, that I prevent than ML Tywin is, like a certain CR pusher or a super fast, like Broman, something like that. But for the most part, ML Tywin is my generic must-ban pick. And the reason why is he does like literally everything. I tried banning Falcon or Clury for a while, and it was just so oppressive having to deal with ML Tywin. He's a knight, so he can theoretically be built for damage reduction with like an Aureus or an Adamant Shield. Many people just put him on Holy Sacrifice in case he dies, but you don't need to do that. He self-cleanses the entire team that he's on every time he gets hit. He can only do it once per turn, but it's still hugely powerful. Sometimes you can't hit him because you don't want to cleanse off a key debuff on somebody else. Or, you can slot him in against a debuff, control type team. And, you get Bassard and everyone gets unbuffable and poof, gone. Or somebody gets stunned and poof, gone. So just a ridiculously strong passive ability with his cleanse. And then the most absurd is his Soulburn S3, which allows him to put speed down on your entire team and then stun everyone, even though it's not a 100% chance. I think it's still a 75% chance. And then on top of that, you have speed down, so he can lap around and then Soulburn again before you break out, because speed down is so powerful. And his S1, takes your souls away, so you never get to Soulburn. So it seems like when you talk about ML Tywin, you're just saying this amazing thing, and this amazing thing, and this amazing thing. He just has too much in one unit right now. And I think if there was any unit in the game that needed a nerf, it would be ML Tywin. I'm not a game designer, so I couldn't say exactly how we should nerf him or how he should be nerfed, but I would imagine putting his Soulburn at 20 souls wouldn't be unreasonable. It would prevent the ridiculous Soulburn cycling that you see with him, and would maybe make him a little easier to answer. So that's a thought. ML Crow is a newcomer, and it's always surprising, when a brand new unit gets to the very top of the tier list. ML Crow is kind of odd because when you look at him and you look at the damage that he does, on face value, it doesn't seem that oppressive. You look at it and you're like, oh, it's only, $4,000 or $4,000 or 5,000 damage, per person on the enemy team when he does his S3. That's not so bad. And maybe it ramps up to, 6 or maybe 7,000 after he does it 2 or 3 more times. But again, not that bad. You feel like you can heal over it. Well, I think the thing that makes him so oppressive right now is the fact that, maybe oppressive is not the right word, maybe meta warping, I guess, or meta shifting, is that he can be picked early because he can be slotted into numerous different types of team compositions. He can be slotted into slow bruiser teams because he's a knight, so he can carry Adamant Shield. He also has, his passive shield for the whole team whenever he gets hit with an AoE ability. So he brings even more mitigation that way. And then he can also be fit into the aggressive, like true damage cleavey type comps, or just even into cleave comps, honestly. Like I've seen him used in Rose Cleave, I've seen him used in other types of cleaves, like paired with Arbiter Vildred and other, high damage dealing units, and just literally overwhelming the enemy team. And the fact that it's true damage kind of attacks them from a different angle, because oftentimes units with really high defense, you know, their HP isn't quite as high. Excuse me, as a unit with like more HP and less defense, for example. So he really complements the damage from like Arbiter Vildred and other damage dealers really well. But what makes him so great as a first pick is that you don't know what direction they're going to go with that, and they can flex into either one depending on what you take. So it's a way to give yourself kind of an all-in-one in your first pick. You have a damage dealer and you have damage mitigation, and depending on how the enemy drafts, you can then pivot into a more aggressive comp, or you can pivot into a more defensive comp, and he's amazing in both. You know, if they really tank up and go aggressive, or go defensive, I'm sorry, he is going to essentially be a Dark Corvus against them and slowly whittle them down. You know, if they don't do that, and it gives you the opportunity to take RB and other high damage dealers, he can effectively just cleave through them. The fact that he gives AoE damage means that it's difficult to take Spectre Tenebria into him, and he's an early pick that can kind of exclude her from the board. And sometimes in, you know, the opponent's haste to tank up and prevent ML Crow from doing his thing, it opens them up to getting Spectre Tenebria'd. So he kind of plays off both sides of that angle. You know, he gives himself speed buff on his S1, so he cycles quickly. He has that inevitability with the true damage, just, you know, constantly and relentlessly doing tons of damage to the enemy team. Aureus is such a powerful defensive artifact. It can kind of work against, you know, the enemy if they have Aureus and you have ML Crow, because the Aureus holder takes a lot of that damage, and can allow you to execute the Aureus holder fairly fast, you know, with ML Crow. So overall, just an extremely strong unit. Giving immunity to everyone is huge for 2 turns. Really, just I can't say enough good things about ML Crow right now. So those are the triple or the double S units. I'm sorry. I wouldn't necessarily say that being in this category necessitates a nerf. I do think that ML Tywin probably deserves a nerf out of all of them. RB and Remnant Violet are a little trickier. I don't know how to handle these two, because I think the main problem with them is their stat lines being so high. So if you move their base stats down, I don't know if that makes them unusable, but it's essentially kind of the standard to which all DPS units are now judged. And unless you make all DPS units with these base stats, it's hard for them to compete, you know, and then you start getting inflation, you know, power creep and stuff. So they're tricky. I'm not sure what the right answer is for them. So that's the tier list. I'm sure there are going to be things that people disagree with. Please let me know in the comments below if you would have put the heroes in a different order. Thanks for watching. Later.